I had met the then director of the Bakehouse through somebody at the Wolfsonian to try to give her some advice on, you know, how could she sort of forge a sustainable future. And there was another organization at the time that was looking to merge with it. So she was, you know, wanting some advice on how to navigate that. And so I started meeting with her and her board. And and then, you know, she stepped down from the Bakehouse. So then the organization was trying to figure out, you know, there was a new board president. He knew there was an opportunity there, and, you know, they needed a director. And I was not definitely not looking to do this or run another cultural organization. So I, you know, said, "Oh, well, I'll help you, you know, I'll just volunteer." I mean, I was volunteering to, let's see if we can find somebody to step in, but I'll, you know, then let's try to help, I'll volunteer to help you figure out what are the options for Bakehouse. And, you know, if it failed and should go out of business, we'll take a look at that. But let's just figure out how to buy some time, get somebody in there to run the day to day. So we interviewed a bunch of people who didn't, you know, because we didn't want to try to do a search for somebody who'd have to give up a job because, you know, it might not be sustainable. So I mean, we tried to find somebody local who could just step in. We couldn't find anybody who would take it. And so there was an artist who was on the board of the Bakehouse, and she had really good administrative skills. And so the president of the board asked if we would take it on together, that I would do the strategic future planning and she would do the day to day. And we got along really well. And so I said, well, you know, I would do that. You know, that would be really fun. I don't mind planning, you know, coming in and being sort of, you know, trying to figure out a solution, which is what, you know, I helped do with the Wolfsonian, trying to figure out, you know, a solution to finding a public partner. Um, so I like that. And so after about 4 months, she realized just how hard it was. And it was taking away too much of the time of her practice. And she couldn't, you know, she couldn't make art. And she said, I can't give up I'm not willing to give up my art to run this thing. And so she said, I can't do it. And I'm going, oh my God, you know, but I had by then raised enough money for Bakehouse with the board to fill 30 empty studios with artists, a real diversity of artists, most of whom went to Dash and New World, had gone off to either Cooper Union, SVA, the Art Institute. They went off and got a BFA or an MFA at a really good school, or had even gone to FIU and got a master's in art, or New World College. And so we didn't have enough money to get through the year. Half the studios were empty, which was how the bills were paid. And it was easier and it had you know, people were wondering about its reputation and the quality of artists and if anybody could just get in there. So a lot of the better artists, you know, and there were actually some really interesting artists there, but it just didn't have the reputation for that. So I just like solicited through friends, send names of the most interesting artists in Miami who represent a Miami voice, who come from a diversity of backgrounds, who have absolutely no money and would make good use of a free space. And if people's names showed up on 2 lists of curators, you know, other art friends, because I didn't know any young artists in Miami, I interviewed them. And if they were interesting and committed to their practice, I thought, okay, from the time they were 13, they were already working on a portfolio. And I wasn't going to judge, are they good or bad? Are they going to make it? And what was success? It was like, will they make good use of the space? And were they serious about their intent? And if they, you know, and I figured anybody from 13 who had been working on a portfolio to get into Dash or New World and then went off and still got a degree had to be pretty serious about being an artist. So we gave away the space, and it really mixed up the population and told the rest of the artists, you know, you have to still pay and these people are free, but otherwise we're not sustained. And everybody mixed well. At first people were suspicious and, you know, worried, and, you know, we were just really transparent about everything. And, you know, and then the Knight Foundation basically funded me to, you know, do a strategic plan for the board to look at the different options it had. And, you know, from giving away free space to artists who couldn't afford to have a studio or had been kicked out of a free space, it was like, okay, we gave you free space. Where are you? You know, why aren't you here every day? Well, I have 5 jobs. Like I work at guest services at ICA. I do art handling at the Paris Art Museum, or I'm a teaching artist at these 2 museums, or I do installation for Museo Vault, or I do packing and crating. I mean, they were all doing things around art because they wanted to be close to it, or they were gallery assistants or whatever. But it was like, but I have to have like 5 or 6 jobs just to pay for my housing. And then some of them were getting evicted because Airbnb was starting to, emerge in the scene. And the owners of homes where they rented a room could get more money from Airbnb. So then they were like homeless and, they had nowhere to live, or they were living 5 in an apartment, or they had to live at home and they were painting in the corner of a bedroom. So I thought, I mean, giving free studios to artists isn't sufficient. They need an affordable place to live in the city, and then I was concurrently, I'd been consulting with Harvard, and we were working on issues of affordability, mobility, sustainability, and, the whole idea of revitalization and, preservation of cultural heritage or identity. So all those, that being around the faculty and the students, and then looking at Bakehouse in the middle of this place and seeing it wasn't just about a cultural organization, but it was really about, an affordability issue and what was going on in Miami and how that impacted artists. And that this organization was founded with the idea of providing a permanent and affordable workspace for artists, but that wasn't enough at this point. So we, Bakehouse as a charitable entity owned a big piece of real estate. I started from my days of the city understanding, and I served for both on the city of Miami and the Dade County, the city of Miami and city of Miami Beach. I served several terms on each of their planning and zoning boards. So I knew enough about land use and politics, and, so I went to those, and then it was so weird. I went to the city to start seeing if there was any appetite to look at our land. We were zoned civic. And I walked into one of the commissioner's offices, who was a community leader and on a board of a community neighborhood, a neighborhood board that I ran, when I was with the city in the early 80s. And he was now city commissioner, Willie Gort. So I went to set up a meeting with him just to sort of see what's going on in the city. And even though his area was Alapata, because he was a commissioner now, I went to him, and his chief of staff was the department director, who was my director when I was assistant director of the community development department. And he had retired from the city. He served many years. And then Willie Gort convinced him to come back and be his chief of staff. So I showed him the site. And he, of course, we worked together when Bakehouse got the money. So he was so familiar with it, but he also hadn't been back at it there. So I said, Frank Castaneda, I said, Frank, and I hadn't seen him in like 30 years, either of them. So it was like, what's going on in the city and the affordability issue and what was going on in Wynwood, and seeing, how artists were being priced out, and just trying to learn what was going on, talking to Michael Spring, trying to get a sense of what was happening, the art making level. So, and then this work I was doing with Harvard, it just made me interested in, this is really this could solve a problem. And this could be really, that it just felt like it was like something that took advantage of all the things I was interested in. What is the role that culture plays in the life of a city? What is the role that artists could play in, giving voice to issues of a city, that being very influenced by the Wolfsonian and its collection. And then the idea of addressing an urban issue. And this was a neighborhood, Wynwood Norte, where we are, is a neighborhood that had been lost its economy with the closing of the bakery and the moving of the garment industry. So I was interested in more than just the bakehouse. I was interested in the neighborhood. So a bunch of us from the neighborhood came together, meeting everybody who was old timers and newcomers, because there were still agency directors there who had been there when I worked there like 40 years earlier. And so we formed a community association just to sort of clean up the neighborhood. I mean, the trash, the people were dumping, the bakehouse hadn't been painted in ages, and the local graffiti artists volunteered to paint the building for us, which they painted now, which is, really nice. I mean, fabulous. So I realized that, the solution to the bakehouse's future sustainability was also a big solution for artists, and that was, providing housing. So for the past 3 years, I've been working with the community. We've all been working together, so it's not just me. We've been, with the city, working together to do a vision plan for the neighborhood, because we're, bounded by the design district, Midtown, Alapata, and the art district, the Wynwood Art District, and we could feel the encroachment and development. And this is a neighborhood that was still intact. And it was like, we need to do something to try to come up with a vision for this neighborhood. One that envisions what's the future of Bakehouse, but every other place in it before, it becomes a site of speculation. Because there were already like vacant lots starting to pop up, and you could sense something was happening. So we formed a community association. We started working with doing workshops. People in the neighborhood could afford it, provided money so to hire the professional expertise. And we did a community vision plan. And when we presented it, the then Commissioner Hardiman noticed how many people were involved, and it was all community driven. So he instructed the planning department to work with us to codify and make it real.